That cold December night in 1962, retired FBI agent William Parker clutched his nurse's hand on his deathbed. His eyes held both terror and regret. "I must speak now," he whispered with a trembling voice. "What I saw in Hollywood, that darkness, no one knows. I've kept it inside for 30 years, but I can't take it to my grave." When the nurse turned on the recording device, Parker's revelations would expose the darkest secret beneath Hollywood's glittering surface. Parker had been assigned to Los Angeles in 1934. As a young agent, his mission was simple: monitor communist activities in Hollywood. But what he found was far more horrifying than communism. A little girl entering through Paramount Studios' back door caught his attention. She looked about Shirley Temple's age, maybe 6 or 7 years old. But this wasn't Shirley. It was an unfamiliar face, and beside her stood a man in a suit, gripping her hand tightly. Parker instinctively followed them. They entered a private building at the very back of the studio lot. When he peered through the window, what he saw made his stomach turn. Inside were child star candidates, 5 or 6 years old, surrounded by Hollywood's most powerful names: Louis B.C. Mayer from MGM, Adolph Zukor from Paramount, Jack Warner from Warner Brothers. "That's when I understood," Parker continued to the nurse. "This wasn't a coincidental gathering. This was an organized system, and everyone was in on it." Shirley Temple had been discovered when she was just 4 years old. Everyone talked about her natural talent, but no one knew what happened during those long hours at the studio. Documents Parker secretly obtained showed that Temple's mother regularly left her daughter for special rehearsals. These rehearsals always took place in the evening hours, after the studio had emptied. Judy Garland's story was even more tragic. She was only 16 during the Wizard of Oz filming, but she had already become a victim of the system. MGM executives regularly gave her drug stimulants in the morning, sedatives at night. Parker had found records of Garland being taken to Louis B.D. Mayer's private suite. Mayer called her his little hunchback and would touch her inappropriately even when others were present. Mickey Rooney was one of the brightest child stars of that era. But the reality Parker discovered was horrifying. While Rooney himself had been a victim, he later became part of the system. As he grew older, he was given the task of preparing new child actors. "They broke him," said Parker. "They inflicted so much pain that eventually he became one of them." But the most horrific details were about the special parties. These parties were held in secluded mansions in the Hollywood Hills, and only selected individuals were invited. Parker had once managed to infiltrate such a party. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. "The children were in costumes," he continued, his voice shaking. "Some were dressed like movie characters. Adults circled around them, selecting them. It was like an auction. But what was being sold?" He couldn't finish the sentence. Parker said Harry Cohn, head of Columbia Pictures, was particularly ruthless. He would call young actresses to his office, lock the door, and not emerge for hours. His secretary had seen Rita Hayworth leave Cohn's office, crying repeatedly when she was just 16. Daryl Fefrishay, Zanuck of 20th Century Fox, used a different method. Under the guise of talent tests, he would take little girls into private rooms and demand they do disgusting things in front of cameras. He would later use these recordings for blackmail. The system was so organized and protected that no one dared to speak. The children's parents either turned a blind eye to get rich or were threatened. The studios, the police department, even some high-ranking FBI officials were under this ring's control. In 1938, Parker witnessed the suicide of a young star named Deanna Durbin. According to official records, she had accidentally overdosed, but Parker knew the truth. Durbin was one of the rare children who tried to escape the system. Universal Pictures executives had tried everything to silence her. In the end, an accident was the easiest solution. "The worst part," said Parker, unable to hold back tears, was that some children disappeared completely. Their families would be paid off, told the child had returned to their hometown. But those children were never seen again. Parker had fought for years to expose this system. He collected evidence, made secret recordings, tried to find witnesses, but each time he was blocked, threatened, and once barely escaped death. In 1945, when he went to the FBI director's office with a suitcase full of evidence, the director told him one thing: "Forget about this, Parker, or you'll be forgotten too." From that day on, Parker had remained silent, but the guilt had eaten him alive. Now on his deathbed, he could finally speak. "I was a coward," he told the nurse. "I could have protected those children, but I chose my own life. Every night I hear their screams." Parker's confessions lasted 3 hours. The names he gave, the dates, the locations, everything revealed the dark truth of Hollywood's golden age. When Parker died the next morning, the nurse delivered the recordings to the FBI. But the recordings disappeared. The nurse died in a car accident a week later, and Hollywood's darkest secret was buried once again. Years passed. The studio system evolved, but the predators never left. They just became more sophisticated, more careful. In 1959, a young actress named Carol Stevens tried to speak to a reporter about what happened to her at Warner Brothers. She was found dead in her apartment 2 days later, ruled a suicide. She was 14 years old. The network extended beyond Hollywood. Parker had mentioned connections to political figures, judges, police commissioners. Senator Joseph McCarthy, known for his anti-communist crusade, was allegedly part of the cover-up. He received regular payments from the studios to keep investigations away from certain areas. One of the most chilling aspects Parker revealed was the grooming schools. These were acting schools specifically set up to find and prepare victims. The Meglin Dance Studio, where Shirley Temple was discovered, was one of them. Parents thought they were sending their children to learn performing arts. In reality, they were feeding them into a predatory system. Jackie Coogan, the child star of Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, had tried to fight back when he came of age. But when he sued his mother and the studio for his earnings, the real reason wasn't just money. Parker said Coogan had threatened to expose everything if he wasn't paid. The Coogan Law, supposedly created to protect child actors' earnings, was actually hush money transformed into legislation. The medical professionals were complicit too. Studio doctors prescribed dangerous drugs to child actors without question. Dr. Frederick Hacker, the prominent psychiatrist who treated many child stars, was known for using experimental treatments that left his young patients docile and compliant. Judy Garland wasn't the only victim of forced medication. Parker had lists of dozens of child actors who were systematically drugged. Elizabeth Taylor, who started at MGM when she was 10, later hinted at the darkness in cryptic interviews. She never spoke directly, but she once said, "The studio system owned us, body and soul. And when I say body, I mean it in ways people don't want to imagine." Her mother, Sarah Taylor, was allegedly one of the few parents who tried to protect her daughter, but even she could only do so much. Parker described a particularly horrifying incident from 1941. A young boy, around 8 years old, had been brought to RKO Pictures for a screen test. The child was never seen leaving the studio. When his parents inquired, they were told he had run away. Parker found evidence that the boy had been disposed of after a party went too far. The body was never found. The photographers and casting directors were often the first point of contact for these predators. They would scout playgrounds, schools, and poor neighborhoods, promising fame and fortune to desperate families. Once a child was in the system, escape was nearly impossible. Those who tried to leave or speak out faced not just career destruction but physical danger. George Jessel, the famous entertainer and producer, ran what Parker called the training house, a mansion in Beverly Hills where young actors were supposedly housed while training for roles. In reality, it was a prison where children were broken psychologically and physically. The neighbors never questioned the screams because they were told it was method acting practice. By the 1950s, the system had adapted to changing times. Television brought new opportunities and new victims. The Mickey Mouse Club, marketed as wholesome family entertainment, had its own dark secrets. Parker claimed that several Mouseketeers simply left for other opportunities but were actually victims who had mental breakdowns or worse. The corruption reached into law enforcement at every level. Parker had tried to work with the Los Angeles Police Department, but discovered that Captain James Hamilton, head of the Hollywood division, was on the studio payrolls. Any complaints that came in were immediately buried, and the complainants often faced harassment or arrest on fabricated charges. There was a network of safe houses throughout Los Angeles where children were taken. These looked like normal homes from the outside but were equipped with hidden rooms, cameras, and worse. Parker had mapped out at least 12 such locations. From Bel Air to Venice Beach, the properties were owned by shell companies that traced back to major studio executives. Even the press was controlled. Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, the powerful gossip columnists, knew about the abuse but used their knowledge for blackmail rather than exposure. They would threaten to reveal scandals unless they got exclusive stories or payments. In exchange, they helped maintain the illusion of Hollywood glamour while children suffered in silence. The few who tried to be heroes paid dearly. Detective Philip Marlowe, not the fictional character, but a real LAPD detective with the same name, had attempted to build a case in 1947. He was found shot in his car, officially ruled a suicide, despite the gun being in his right hand when he was left-handed. His files disappeared from evidence the same night. Parker spoke of coded language used within the industry. Difficult to work with meant a child who resisted. Went back to theater meant they had been institutionalized. Retired from acting often meant they were dead. The trades would print these euphemisms without question, and the public never knew the truth. The talent agencies were complicit. MCA, William Morris, and others would specifically recruit vulnerable children, orphans, runaways, or those from broken homes. They knew these children had no one to protect them. Agents would receive bonuses not for getting children roles, but for delivering them to private meetings with executives. Religious institutions that should have protected children were also involved. Father Eugene O'Brien, who ran a Catholic orphanage that supplied many child actors, was a regular at the Hollywood parties. He would select children for special opportunities that parents were told were prestigious auditions. Parker had evidence that O'Brien received monthly payments from 3 major studios. The international connection was another horrifying aspect. Children were brought in from other countries under the guise of cultural exchange programs. These children, who didn't speak English and had no local connections, were especially vulnerable. Several young actors from Europe simply vanished after arriving in Hollywood. Their disappearances never investigated. Some of the biggest names in Hollywood were involved in covering up the crimes, even if they didn't participate directly. Directors who knew but kept quiet. Actors who saw but said nothing. Crew members who were threatened into silence. Parker estimated that for every predator there were dozens who enabled the system through their silence. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated. Children were told they were special, that what happened was normal in show business, that telling anyone would destroy their families' lives. Many were photographed in compromising situations as insurance against future disclosure. These photos were kept in studio vaults, a sword hanging over the victims' heads forever. By 1955, Parker had compiled enough evidence to fill several filing cabinets. He had photographs, documents, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies. But when he tried to present this to federal prosecutors, he was told the case was too big to prosecute and would destroy American culture. The implication was clear. The truth would never be allowed to surface. The studios had a cleanup crew, Parker revealed. When situations got too dangerous or a child knew too much, there were specialists who made problems disappear. Dr. Harold Stevens, officially a psychiatrist, was known for his ability to treat children who became hysterical. His treatments often left them unable to form coherent memories. Some ended up in mental institutions, dismissed as delusional if they ever tried to speak. The financial network supporting this system was vast. Parker traced money flowing from box office revenues into slush funds used for bribes, hush money, and maintaining the infrastructure of abuse. Major banks were complicit, setting up accounts that couldn't be traced. The money trail led to judges, politicians, and even foreign governments who profited from Hollywood's success. Parker mentioned a ledger he had seen in 1943, kept by an accountant at MGM. It listed children by number, not name, with amounts paid to various parties for their acquisition and maintenance. The coldness of reducing human beings to inventory items still haunted him. He had tried to photograph the ledger, but was caught and barely escaped with his life. As television became dominant in the 1950s, the Predator network adapted. Children's show hosts, trusted by millions of American families, were some of the worst offenders. Parker wouldn't name specific shows, fearing retribution even on his deathbed, but he said the most beloved programs harbored the darkest secrets. The medical examiner's office was another point of corruption. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who would later become famous for celebrity autopsies, was allegedly paid to alter causes of death. Children who died from abuse were recorded as having accidents or natural causes. Parker claimed at least a dozen child deaths were covered up this way between 1940 and 1960. There was an underground railroad of sorts, but in reverse. Instead of helping slaves escape to freedom, it helped predators move children around the country. If heat got too intense in Hollywood, children would be sent to New York, Chicago, or Miami, where partner networks existed. The children were told they were going on location for filming, but often never returned. Parker described the parties becoming more extreme over time. What started as inappropriate touching in the 1930s had evolved into elaborate rituals by the 1950s. Drugs became commonplace, used to make children compliant. Underground rooms were built specifically for these gatherings, soundproofed and equipped with devices Parker couldn't bring himself to describe. The war years provided perfect cover, with attention focused on the global conflict. The Predators operated with even less scrutiny. Child actors were used for morale-boosting tours that were actually trafficking operations. Bob Hope's USO tours, while legitimate on the surface, allegedly included private entertainments that Parker said made him sick to investigate. Marilyn Monroe, though not a child when she became famous, had started in the system young. Parker suggested her death wasn't suicide but murder because she had threatened to expose what happened to her as a teenage model. She knew too much about too many powerful people. The weekend she died, she had allegedly told friends she was going to blow the lid off Hollywood. The tentacles reached into animation studios as well. Walt Disney, while not directly implicated, allegedly knew about abuses happening with child voice actors and young visitors to the studio. Parker found correspondence suggesting Disney was blackmailed into silence with threats to destroy his company's wholesome image. As Parker's voice grew weaker, he revealed one final secret. There was a film, hidden in a vault somewhere in Los Angeles, that documented everything. Shot secretly by someone within the system, who had grown disgusted. It showed prominent figures with children at one of the parties. Parker had seen fragments of it in 1951, but could never locate the complete reel. He believed it still existed, waiting to be discovered. The nurse listened in horror, as Parker named more names, gave more dates, revealed more locations. Studio heads, actors, directors, politicians, police officers, doctors, priests. The web of complicity seemed endless. Each revelation was more shocking than the last, painting a picture of systematic evil that had infected every level of Hollywood society. Parker's final words, barely audible, were "They're still out there. The system never died, it just evolved. Someone needs to stop them. Someone needs to save the children." He gripped the nurse's hand one last time, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. God forgive me, I wasn't brave enough." The nurse sat in stunned silence as Parker's breathing stopped. She held the recordings, knowing she possessed evidence of the greatest scandal in Hollywood history. She made copies, hid them in different locations, and contacted the FBI the next morning. 3 days later, the nurse's apartment was ransacked. The recordings were gone. A week after that, her car went off Mulholland Drive in what was ruled an accident. But she had been smart. One copy survived, hidden in a safety deposit box under a false name. That copy would surface decades later, when another scandal would rock Hollywood. But by then, most of the perpetrators were dead, their victims silenced by time or trauma. The statute of limitations had passed, and the evidence was dismissed as unverifiable and possibly fabricated. But those who knew the truth remembered Parker's words: "The system never died. It evolved, adapted, and continued." New generations of predators learned from the old ones' mistakes. They became more careful, more sophisticated, and more protected. Today, when scandals occasionally surface, they're treated as isolated incidents. But Parker knew better. He had seen the machine, understood its scope, and died knowing he had failed to stop it. His confession, made in those final hours, stands as testimony to Hollywood's darkest secret, one that was never fully exposed, never fully punished, and perhaps never fully ended. The nurse's hidden recording was finally discovered in 2019, when the safety deposit box was opened after being abandoned for decades. But by then, it was too late. The last witnesses were dead, the evidence degraded, and the world had moved on. Hollywood's golden age retained its shine, its darkness buried beneath layers of nostalgia and myth. But for those who know where to look, the signs are still there. In the destroyed careers, the mysterious deaths, the settlements paid in silence, in the child stars who grew up broken, addicted, and lost. In the whispers that still echo through Hollywood's halls, warning young actors to be careful, to never be alone with certain people, to always have an exit plan. Parker's story, dismissed as the ramblings of a dying man by some, believed as gospel truth by others, remains Hollywood's most controversial secret. The FBI officially denies any knowledge of his claims. The studios maintain their innocence. The victims, those still alive, remain mostly silent, bound by fear, trauma, or legal agreements. But the truth, as Parker knew, has a way of surfacing. Perhaps not in our lifetime, perhaps not in the next. But someday, when the last of the old guard is gone and the final sealed documents are opened, the full extent of Hollywood's darkest secret will be revealed. Until then, Parker's deathbed confession stands as a warning, a testimony, and an indictment of an industry that sold dreams while creating nightmares. The system Parker described might seem like ancient history, but its echoes persist. Modern Hollywood has its own scandals, its own predators, its own victims. The methods may have changed, but the fundamental corruption Parker witnessed, the exploitation of the vulnerable by the powerful, continues in new forms. As the recording ended, Parker's voice fading into static, one thing remained clear. Hollywood's golden age was built on a foundation of silence, complicity, and unimaginable suffering. The stars we still celebrate, the films we still cherish, the studios we still revere, all carry the stain of this hidden history. William Parker died believing he had failed. But by speaking out, even at the very end, he ensured that the truth would not die with him. Somewhere in dusty archives and forgotten memories, in sealed files and hidden recordings, the evidence remains. Waiting for someone brave enough to bring it to light, waiting for justice that may never come. The darkness Parker revealed wasn't confined to a single era or a single group of predators. It was systematic, institutional, and protected by the very forces meant to prevent it. His confession, made on that cold December night in 1962, remains one of the most damning indictments of Hollywood ever recorded, and perhaps the most ignored.